Brooke, welcome to Endurance Minded.
Thank you.
Yeah, so lots to talk about. We'll kick things off with maybe just a bit of background on how you arrived at where you're at. You're an athlete yourself who's continued to set goals and push yourself, and you've been involved in lots of different capacities in endurance sports. You're also a dietitian. You own a sports nutrition company that helps athletes dial in their nutrition. So yeah, give us some background, like what brought you to where you're at, and all the twists and turns in the road that I'm sure that led you there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So I've always had a passion for nutrition. And when I went to college, I went to Arizona State. And when I was doing my undergrad there, ages 18 to 22, I looked into the nutrition program and I took one look at this laundry list of chemistry classes. And I was like, whew, I don't know if I'm here in college for this experience right now. So I ended up delaying my nutrition degree and I went communication degree route the first time. And that was good. I came out, worked for a company, human resources, and then went into meeting planning. And I just had this pull in the back of my head always like, you need to be in nutrition. You need to get into nutrition. When I was about 20, no, 19 to 21, around there, I experienced a bout with disordered eating myself. I had a very traumatic freshman year of college, and it kind of sent me into an anorexia bout. And so I'd had personal experience with it, and I just felt like I'm supposed to be helping people. This is what I'm, because luckily, I am someone that recovered from it fully. And I just felt like I wanted to help people. So I started this nutrition program. I went back to school at age 27, went back to the community college route because this time I was paying for it all myself. So I left this pretty good job with a pharmaceutical company to go back and pursue these nutrition degrees. My parents were like, what are you doing? And so I started back at the community college, and then I worked back up to ASU again, going through the program. I wanted to work with eating disorder patients. That's again why I decided to do this. But as I got into my program, I also at the same time really got into endurance sports. I started running first, then I started triathlon, and then I went all in with triathlon, Ironman distance. I mean, it became my life. And so as I was going through my bachelor's, I'm thinking, I want to go more sports nutrition. That's where, my passion really lies. And I believe I could still help disordered eating patients, but just through the sports nutrition realm. So got my bachelor's in nutrition and then went on to do my master's. With the master's came the internship. To be a dietitian, you have to have a 9-month internship that exposes you to all different areas of nutrition so that you have the background of understanding what clinical nutrition is like and school food service and WIC. And of course, I did sports rotations. So that's how I ended up, finishing up my master's. And then when I came out of school, there was no job that I wanted to go into. So my husband and I started triathlon stores, and then I had offices in those triathlon stores. And so I was able to, people would come in to shop, to talk about races and that kind of thing. And it was a perfect fit for me to sell my nutrition services to these athletes. So that's how it started. That's how I am where I am. I don't have the triathlon stores anymore, but I love the nutrition consulting aspect.
Yeah. What's been your experience with disordered eating in the athlete realm or arena? Because I think we oftentimes maybe think those are two separate things, but I know from just being in that space for my entire career, most of my career, that it's something that's definitely pervasive. But how have you been able to, or what's it looked like to service those patients and those individuals, but through the lens of sports nutrition? How is that showing up in kind of the endurance sports space or the athlete space?
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends. I have found that it depends on the level of the athlete. So the more elite up to professional, maybe there's more pressure on those individuals to be a certain weight, to look a certain way. So I think that factors in. And I also found that with just general, age groupers in triathlon or people that are just generally racing more recreationally, a lot of people have the goal of trying to shed weight or reach a certain body composition goal while also trying to keep their performance elevated at its top level for them. And there's a bit of a conflict there because if you're trying to
Mhm.
lose weight and to retain your power, your strength, your immunity going into races is very tricky. And so that's what I've been able to work a lot with people on, is making sure they stay healthy throughout training and racing, and they're not, under consuming calories, under consuming carbohydrates, and putting themselves at risk.
Yeah, that's something that, like you said, I think so many athletes, and I think it's easy for folks like me and you to see it when you're in this space every day. But I know that a lot of athletes struggle to understand kind of the season, like how to compartmentalize these different goals. Like you said, it's like, okay, when I'm in like peak race prep, like that's probably not the time to do some of these other things, right? It's going to be really challenging to kind of feed the machine and keep all those boxes checked and keep your body in a place where it can actually produce those efforts um, and get to some, lose weight or get to some sort of body
Mhm.
composition. What's your um, what's the runway that you recommend for athletes? Like if let's say they have a marathon, in the fall. Here we are at the early part of 2024. Um, what, how do we tackle that in a way, or how do we address the nutrition, the fueling, the lifestyle piece in a way that's like sustainable? So, what's that runway typically? What's your recommendation for how someone should do that in a way that's like safe and productive?
Yeah. So if someone has a goal, and I try to, within my work with clients, not focus on weight. Weight's a slippery slope. And a lot of times people are comparing their current weight to a high school weight or a college weight, something that's just not, as we age, there's physiologic changes that are happening, hormones changing and that kind of thing that oftentimes don't allow people to get back to this ideal weight in their head. But that being said, when people want to make positive body changes, I fully promote that and support that, and focus more on changing body composition. The earlier they come to me wanting to make some of these changes further out from the race, obviously the more time we have to work on it at that point. When they're just establishing their base, as opposed to 6 months down the road when they're in the heavy build, that's not a good time, as you had mentioned, to be tackling some of these goals. So doing it earlier on, and then just realizing that there's something called nutrition periodization, which means as you go through your training block, your needs are constantly evolving up and down. It's not just, one stable recommendation for the whole year. There's a lot of, you know, changes that happen as you go through different training cycles. So,
I want to maybe go back to a point that you mentioned earlier, that or maybe just address there's certainly like a pervasive um, mindset in kind of the endurance sports community and athletes at large. Like athletes look a certain way, right? And I know that can be really disruptive for a lot of athletes, whether it's how they feel about themselves, or whether it's um, or maybe we could even take athletes away from that. We could just say, it can be disruptive for a lot of individuals. But with social media and we see pictures. We're just inundated with like pictures of what we imagine like an athlete looks like, or like a fit body, and I'll use quotes for all that. um, how do you help? I don't know, maybe one, like what's your kind of take on that, and then two, how do you help people just arrive at a point that's like best for them, right? Like aside from or irrespective of having a six pack or being some super lean triathlete, and some, I mean, we have all these like pictures in our head of like, oh, if we don't look like this person, then I'm not an X, right? I'm not a
Mhm.
runner. I'm not a triathlete. I'm not a, so yeah, I don't know. What, just like, I'd love to hear just your kind of perspective on that. And then how you help people address, I think, just, the realities of living in the world that we do, and being exposed to all these external kind of validation pieces.
Oh, the comparison game is it seems like it's inevitable these days with social media, right? And it can be very dangerous and very damaging for people. What I like to see currently is some of the female triathletes and ultra runners kind of challenging these ideals and saying, you know what, there is no ideal. We all have different body types. We all look best at different weights and BMIs and body composition. And not everybody should be pigeonholed into this ideal body type. So I love seeing that coming from down from the pros, because people listen and they say, oh, okay, well, I should be comfortable with myself as well. Um, I think that something that I have noticed with clients is that a lot of times people do come to me and they're like, I have this weight goal. I want 10 to 15 pounds off. So, depending on where they're at in their training cycle, if it's a healthy time for them to try to shed a little bit of weight, I'll build recommendations around that. A lot of times, what I see is that, using an example of someone who wants to be, let's say they are 150 and they want to be 140. Well, they get to 145 or they get closer to 140 and they start realizing that they're running or they're cycling or their whatever their activity is suffering, because they are that now compromising their immunity, their power, their strength, that kind of thing. And so I think sometimes it takes people seeing that themselves. And sometimes it goes the other way too. Sometimes people shed a few pounds and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. I'm able to run lighter and that kind of thing. So it's highly individual. But I think it takes sometimes people seeing it for themselves. My job as a dietitian is to kind of build positive messaging and to say, listen, there is no right weight. There's no ideal body weight. That is total falsity. There is no ideal body weight for a specific person. It's where do you feel your best and where do you feel that you're performing your best. So,
Yeah, the performance piece, I think, I mean, that can't be overstated, right? Is that we forget that, specifically with our athlete lens on, but even as just, if it's people who don't have athletic goals, I mean, at the end of the day, like the only metric that we really care about is like, how do you feel, right? How do you feel doing the things that you like to do, right? Engaging, like moving through the world. And I think so it's, we forget about that, right? We're like chasing that ideal composition, or that like what we think is, again, I'll use quotes, like ideal look. And then we don't feel great. We don't, it's like not where our body performs
exactly.
best. Yeah. What's one of the things that I like had to really grapple, and I've been lucky. I've I've never had to deal with or like disordered eating, or it's never been an issue. Um, but even like changing, you mentioned earlier, like as we get older and things change, then I think often like with, a kind of a normal part of like our trajectory as athletes is, we explore different modalities, right? Like full on, Ironman triathlete, to, I know like this year you're running Boston and looking at ultra distance, running races. And so those are very different things. And like, as we explore our athletic identity, our bodies change too, and that was one of the things like that I had to really, it kind of hit me by surprise where like when I was racing bikes professionally, I was like 130 something pounds. Now I was also in my early into my mid-ish 20s. Um, and then I started to like run more, and I was riding, but just kind of recreationally. And then I was like 150-ish pounds. And then I was like doing more stuff in the mountains and like just exploring different modalities. And then that creeped up a little more, and like my waist size was staying the same, but I was like, man, like I am in, like now I'm almost 200 pounds. And I kind of had to like grapple with that a little bit. I was like, oh man, am I not fit, or is this like, do I need to, like, even as much as I know about how to be healthy and how to fuel my body, like it still crept in. I was like, do I need to like burn more calorie? Like, am I getting, I was like, am I getting fat? Like, is it,
Mhm.
and I'm not, like, it literally, I can see in the mirror, like, but it
You
just,
fit
I
it.
couldn't help myself. Yeah. And I was like, man. And I just kept, like you said, like comparing myself to one, like my 20 years ago self, and, just a totally different time in my life
Mhm.
and that body. And then even like looked at pictures, and I was like, oh man, like I was really like lean and like athletic. And then I was like, I don't look like that now. So I tell that story to highlight like what's been your experience with working with individuals who just like are on that journey. And I think it, like, we change, like it's probably not realistic to be, and maybe not even healthy in some ways, to be like the exact same body composition for decades on end, right?
Mhm.
And like we reflect upon that like time we thought we were at our best.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's so often like a very younger version of ourselves. It's the
Mhm.
high school version, it's the college version.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like yeah, I'd love to just hear your perspective on what that experience is like on the dietitian side, or even like your own. I mean, you've been an athlete a long time, like maybe your own like personal experience or journey with just that like evolution of athletic identity.
Well, and the funny thing is it happens to all of us. Everybody ages, right? And everyone's body changes in some way. I think very small percentage of people look the same at age 20 as they do at age 40 or 50, just because bodily changes that are happening, muscle mass decrease and that kind of thing. We have to work harder for results as we get older. We have to change a lot of our nutrition strategy, especially, for women as they approach perimenopause and go through menopause and postmenopause. Women, after they have babies, bodies are totally different. And there's really some fun surprises that go along with that for a lot of myself included. So I think that's been, for me personally, that's probably where the challenges really have been, as far as an athlete goes, because I did a lot of my triathlon racing Ironmans before I had my kiddos. And then I had 3 pregnancies. Well, and actually, when I did my last Ironman, I had just had my second pregnancy and went straight from 2 pregnancies into boom, into real heavy Ironman training. Well, I mean, I progressed. I didn't injure myself. But, I had to go do seek out PT to work out some prolapse issues, just things that you never think about when you're in your 20s, until you experience some of this life stuff. So I guess, in a nutshell, it's something that we all experience in different ways, and you don't have a choice about it. So you kind of just got to roll with it and figure out, and
Mhm.
also be open to, hey, maybe my body at this weight is where I'm supposed to be right now. Maybe I'm the best athlete that I can be at this weight. And if I start taking weight off, that's again when I start compromising, on my performance. So I think most of the athletes I work with are pretty comfortable with that. Once they figure out that this is kind of their new norm, as long as they feel good about themselves, they feel good in their clothes fit, they're like, okay, this is, kind of I'm moving into a little bit different era of my life. So,
Mhm. Yo, what's the mental part of that for the folks that you're talking to? Because, and yeah, you touched on it, but I'm just curious. Like, we can address the, obviously, like the prescriptive side of things, right? And this happens on the coaching front too. Is like we can write all the best workouts in the world and like have the best plan mapped out, and like, okay, this is your route to success, like,
Mhm.
or as best as we can map it out. And then there's the, it's self-doubt. It's like, it's that nagging, like, oh, I look different, or kind of like making peace, like you said, with like that body composition, and just their ability levels and where they're at in their life. Um, yeah, what's been your experience, again, like personally or like professionally, with just helping people navigate that side of things? Because
Mhm.
I'm sure you would agree, like that's the most dynamic part, right? It's like we can have the best plan and all the best knowledge, and then it's it's the it's the mental game, right? It's the stuff that
Exactly.
happens between our ears. So yeah, I'd love
Huge.
to.
You,
Yeah.
you know, something that I've noticed in myself and with others is that I feel like your mental toughness, as you have years of these endurance sports under your belt, it gets so much better. I'm so much
Mm.
stronger now than I was in my late 20s when I started with this. And I find that to be true with a lot of clients as well, because if you're still in it as you get into your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, you're pretty darn tough. Like you've done a lot of hard things at this point. And to be in that point, you have to be pretty flexible, adaptive, accepting of again your changes that your body has gone through, and just having a pretty good amount of gratitude for health and being able to do some of this, stuff as well. So I know, like for me, the Boston qualifying race was huge for me because once I did that, and I was lucky enough to do it my first attempt, which was huge for me because I didn't know if it would take 10 attempts. I was gonna put in all the time that it required, but I got it the first time. And I was like, wow, I don't think I could have done this 10 years ago. Not as much from the physical side of it, and I didn't have kids at that point, so I would have had more training time hypothetically, but more from like I want it. My brain, I can tell my brain knows how much I want it, and it's going to fight for things. So I think that's something that's kind of cool as athletes age, is you get tougher as you go. There's no question about it. Even queen of ultra running, Courtney, I was reading an article that she put out, she was featured in the other day, and she was just talking about how her mental toughness, since she started with ultra running, and just, where she's at now compared to then. It's pretty amazing what your mind can do.
There's so much value in like having water under the bridge, right? To your point, like I think, and I think that's a piece of kind of the athletic experience that gets overlooked. Is there is something There's kind of no replacing just being in it enough and having enough cumulative experiences that you can just kind of adapt, right? That you just, I tell people that with like racing in particular, it's like, we can plan and we can have the best training and the best nutrition and the best, and like, you're still like, you still just got to be in it,
Yeah.
and you still just kind of have to show up at the start line enough to know that it'll be fine, and that you can adapt, and when something goes sideways, no matter what that
Yeah.
is, right? It's a GI thing, it's a flat tire, it's a blister, it's a right, the list goes on, right? Like those experiences, those outcome based scenarios are so much out of our control that yeah, you just have to kind of be in it enough, and certainly new athletes, and we all do this, but newer athletes put so much pressure on these singular moments and events, right? And I think that there's a lot of value. Not that we can't care about those things, but knowing too that like hopefully I can do it next year,
Mhm.
right? Like I think that's been the biggest change for me is if I have like a goal, whether it's a race or like something in the mountains I'm doing, like some sort of objective, I care about that thing, but I also, like, I'll do it next year.
Mhm.
I'll do right. Like, it's just building. It's just a stepping stone in the direction of being a lifelong athlete. So there's almost this kind of relinquishing the pressure isn't as great because I'll just keep building,
Mhm.
right? Like if it goes sideways and I don't feel great or something happens or I break my toe or whatever, right? Like, it's okay. I can come back next year. I can try
Yeah.
something else. I can continue to build. Um, what's been, yeah, like what, I mean, you're on a new trajectory, or maybe not new, but like divergent from some of your historical like endeavors, like triathlon, Boston. And then I know you're looking for an ultra distance run later this year. Like, walk me through just that evolution of kind of how you've directed your interest and stayed engaged. And I'm always fascinated in how people stay excited and stay engaged for forever, you
Mhm.
know? Because we also, it's kind of a pervade, in like the world of like 90 days to fitness, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm like, well, or forever, like hopefully until you die.
Long
People are
way.
like, when is it? Yeah, people are like, when is it over? I'm like, never. I don't.
Yeah.
Well, when the casket closes. Yeah. What's been? Yeah. What's that look like for you?
Well, and first, just to go back real quick, I so can appreciate what you were saying in the last comment there about like adapting to whatever a race might throw at you, because there's always going to be something that goes wrong. And when
Mm-hmm.
I work with my nutrition clients, I take away a lot of those what ifs in the nutrition and hydration realm, but I can't control every single thing that happens. But that being aside, there's crashes that happen on bikes. There's all different weather, all this type of thing. So being able to adapt to whatever comes your way is such a huge life lesson that goes way beyond racing, and just the confidence that athletes are able to build from these races, that you can apply to all other areas of your life, not just your athletic area of your life. So how do I stay engaged? After I did that last Ironman, it was in 2018. I was burnt out with triathlon. Oh my goodness. I was like, never again. I don't ever want to see my bike again. It was a very challenging race, and I trained for it with two kids under, like, right around two, an infant and a 2-year old, and with a business, and it was crazy. And so I took a long break from triathlon, and I said, okay, what's something that I can do now with my current mom situation? And then I eventually had my third kiddo, Viv. I'm like, what can I do? I can do running. Running's a lot simpler. I can get on a treadmill. It's a lot less gear. I don't have to, a lot of the cycling stuff is time consuming, and you have to have a lot more time to be able to do all that cycling and that kind of thing. So I went into running, and my focus was, okay, let's get to Boston. And so now that that's coming up in April, I'm really excited to have that goal, that's coming up, that I can check off. And now I have a reestablished love for triathlon that's come out of nowhere. I feel like I just needed some time, some time away, reconnected with a group of amazing triathletes in Bozeman, and they sucked me right back in. And so now I'm exploring, and I'm not up to full Ironman. I think it's going to be a while before that, but a half Ironman this summer, and that's going to be really cool. And then looking at doing my first ultra, that's something I've been wanting to do forever. I've had so many ultra clients, so many. And for me, as a dietitian, it's important to me that I've experienced what these people that I'm leading towards these races are experiencing. And so even though I feel like I've done a 50K, a 50 mile, or even a 100 miler in my head because I've built fuel plans and that kind of thing, I want to get out there and experience it. And so that's where the goal of the 50 miler comes in. Is that's a really important part of what I do. Is, do I walk the walk? Can people trust me because they know I've been there, not just that I've read journals? So I feel like both pieces are important.
Yeah. I know I've I think there is so much value in um like kind of being our own um I've called myself a lab rat, self-imposed. I'm like, it's, you're kind of a student of the sport, you're a student of, um, of what it looks and feels like to grapple with and face and set challenges like similar to the people that we work with. I do think that that's important. Of course, we don't have to do every single thing. There's who has time to do all the different disciplines, but yeah, I love. I mean, do you find like is it still exciting or whatever language you would use test test those things out on yourself or experiment with maybe test isn't the right word, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah, is that still like motivating and like
Yeah.
fun to kind of tweak those things?
For sure. It's so fun. Like I like to get my hands on new products. If there's new, fueling products that come out there on the market, and there's been a lot lately. When I first started this business in 2012, we were pretty limited, I mean, as far there was goo and power bar and like the basics. I like to encourage my clients to kind of get outside of those products and kind of expand their knowledge and try different things. But no, that's super exciting for me because at the end of the day, even what am I, like 12, 13 years into this, I am as passionate about it as when I started, if not more so. So that makes me happy. That's a good sign that, I did the right thing when I went back to school, kind of as a later returning student, is like, I really love what I do, and helping people. Yes, helping them through their goal, their A race or whatever it might be. Yes, but also again translating all of what they've learned into their life and how they can apply it and be more confident human beings and more, just know that they can do things they never thought they could do. That's the coolest thing.
That's one of my biggest. I think the thing that keeps me most excited about continuing to like engage in my version of like athleticism and endurance sports and whatever that looks like is the direct corollaries in every other area of my life, right? Like I've kind of developed a bit of like it's almost like a mantra now over the last several years. Like fitness is a really great side effect of exercise,
Yeah.
right? It's like actually the value is in like the confidence and
Yeah.
in the like understanding that you can do hard things and that you can adapt and that you can feel good about yourself and be confident, all the things, like the list goes on. And then like en route to stacking all those things and developing all those skills, fitness happens,
Mhm.
and that's a really cool side effect.
Mhm.
You're like, if it feels good to be fit,
Yeah.
but even if like that didn't happen for some reason, it's still valuable, right? And I think that's been that's been. I mean, I have been the person for a long, long time. It was pure fitness,
Mhm.
right? Like I didn't. I was just like, I'm a racer. I want to go fast. I want to run races. People are like, "What's your why?" I was like, "Winning races." Like that's it, And so, and I think that's an important place to have come from because so as people struggle with that, right? To understand like that undercurrent and what that the value of like the intrinsic value of why we're doing these things and why we want to make time for them. And
Yes.
um, yeah, have you? Um, Yeah, what's been your experience with that? I mean, you touched on it, but like I'd love to hear. I mean, again, just the journey from, all these, changing careers to doing things athletically. What's been your biggest maybe like takeaway from what being an athlete has provided you outside of a fit body?
Oh, all of the learned lessons. I think for me, probably the biggest is the confidence of just, I can do this. I did my first triathlon in 2007, maybe. I didn't know what a triathlon was. I thought it was something that involved like shot put on a field. Like I had no idea what a triathlon was. And a friend said to me, let's go do this Olympic triathlon. And it was a terrible first race. I mean, I was no idea. I don't even know what I was wearing. I probably wore street clothes for this race. And it was let's just say it was a good starting point, right? And then I was like, you know what? I can do better than that. And so the next race, I did better than that. And then the next race, and then I started moving up all the distances up to Ironman. And I did an Ironman, and I'm like, what am I actually doing right now? Because I did not have an athletic background. People are always like, oh, swim, bike, or run your specialty. I'm like, none. And none of them still are. I think running is more my specialty now. But no, I just had the desire to want to do it and to improve and to find confidence in that arena. And so this is a cool story. When I was in the labor and delivery room with my third kiddo, I decided that this birth was going to be a natural birth, right? So you got to really amp yourself up. I'm like, this is going to be really painful and maybe horrific. I don't know. And there's a board in there, like a whiteboard in the hospital room. And I told my husband that was in there, I said, can you go up and write something on that board for me? Because everything, contractions were just starting, it was getting intense. And I said, can you go write Norseman on that board? Because that was my last Ironman that I had done a year or two prior. I used that confidence from that race to do the natural delivery of my child. So things that you accomplish, your race accomplishments, are limitless as far as where it can take you, going forward. I always pull on race memories and say, you did that. If you did that, you can do this. And so that's been really helpful, so helpful for me over the years.
That's such a great story. I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah. I mean, and that's such like a direct, um, yeah, like a direct line to, like the name of the race.
Yeah.
And then that just pulls, you're able to pull from those like memories and like those takeaways.
Yes.
Um, Yeah, not to mention, I'm sure you've probably have a much more. I've heard all kinds of like versions of this, but the like, you know, like labor being compared to like X race, right? In terms of like the toll that it takes on your body, and I've heard it, whatever distance it is, it's grueling, right? Like it's the most extreme thing of like any endurance athlete that you would go and do. It's Ironman, it's 100 miler. I've heard it compared to all kinds of things. So there's also just probably that very direct, like this is a physical activity,
Yeah.
and I'm going to need some real physical strength um,
Exactly.
to get through this thing.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
also my identity. For a long, long time, triathlete was my identity, a piece of my identity. And so I'm able to pull on upon that, Brooke. When I saw Norseman on that board, I'm like, you are that. You did that race. And I think that's to be able to relate to that and to become, because maybe on some days I'm not Brooke Norseman. I'm not strong like that. But that day I needed to be that version of myself. So anyway,
mm,
yeah.
I love that. Yeah, yeah, we're not. Um, yeah, we all have off days.
Hmm.
We're not always Ironman strong. We're not always marathon strong. We're not, whatever the discipline is that resonates with us. So yeah, like just being able to pull from that. I find myself doing that too, and like really, on shitty days where it feels, feels more uphill than not.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, this is not as bad as, and I would go back to like middle of a night in a snowstorm in a 100-mile ultra marathon, or whatever like experience, and you're like, well, if I can put up with that for 12 hours, like I can put up with this for like a day, right? Or like
Exactly.
I can have a tough conversation with someone, or I can have whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I want to bounce around, or go back, because I had a thought a few minutes ago, and I wanted to. You were talking about like exploring new products and like trying that on for yourself, and that's one of the things that we've seen this just like massive um, evolution in products that support our athletic endeavors. Like you said, like I was in the same boat when I first started. running marathons and doing triathlon, it was like the old yellow wrapper power bars that were like, rip your teeth out, and you used to stick them to the top tube of your bike, right? Like just I mean, it was
Oh
gross,
yeah.
and they'd melt all over your stuff,
Well,
um, and then now, yeah, there's all kinds of things. What's with your, from the dietitian perspective, what's been some of the like bigger, more, I guess, positive changes that we've seen in that space? Like,
mm.
is it good? Like, what's out there that is helpful? What are some of the, yeah, like what's some of the best, evolutions that we've seen in that space in terms of things to help athletes?
It's a good transition overall, very good. Those power bars, I know what you're talking about. They're like this big, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
like really sticky and like, yeah,
Hmm.
melty and just so all of the original, like the OG sports nutrition products, I'm not a fan of. Anyone that knows me
Yeah.
well knows that I'm not a fan of Gatorade for my athletes. Gatorade is mostly sugar, food dyes, and not enough sodium to sustain most of the athletes that I see. Goo, I'm not a big fan of goo because it shreds people's GI systems. I mean, there's a handful of clients who are like, I really like goo. I've been using it for a long time. It works well for me. Cool. If it works for you. But for most people, there's been a whole assortment of other products that have hit the market that are more natural, if you will. One example I like to use is Humagel. They formulate it with chia seeds. So it changes the consistency and the texture of the gel a little bit in a favorable way to most people. It's more of like a jelly or a jam instead of goo is more of like a how would you explain goo? Like a
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, as you were, I was like, what is that? Like, I can like feel it. I've eaten thousands of them.
yes.
Um, they don't work for me anymore, but what? Yeah, what is the? Yeah, it's like a,
It's
it's
almost
like
like
a
an
like
icing or something.
yeah,
Like
yeah. Yeah. It's like a thick icing, I think, and it's kind of gritty like that too. Like if you were to just like squeeze, yeah, that's
and you can
interesting. I know
feel
I've
it.
never had to like think about how to
How to describe it?
talk about the texture, and it's hard to nail down, but I think yeah, icing is good.
Well, and it's not real food, and so it makes sense it would be hard to describe. Whereas
Right.
Huda, it still has some refined sugars added to it, but it has actual pureed fruit in there. So it's closer to resembling a real food item, which I believe our bodies respond much better to. Um, and the other thing about goo is feels like it's rotting your teeth as it's going on. You're like, I actually
Hmm.
feel like I'm going to need a root canal after this race. And
Hmm.
so that's some of the challenges. But so products like Huma, Spring Energy is another one that people really like. Mirror Energy, like MUIR Energy. The thing about some of these products is that they've been more designed for the ultra communities, I feel like, in that
Mm.
they're not all just carbohydrate. Sometimes they pull on some nut butter or some nuts for a little bit of fat and protein. And so it's a little bit more diverse than the traditional gels. Some races call for more straight up carbohydrate the entire time, depending on the intensity and the length of the race, and also the timing of where you're at in the race. But some races, you need more than just carbohydrate if you're doing a 100-mile running race. Like you have to have other
Hmm.
nutrients in there. Otherwise, you don't have any satiety, nothing to keep you full, nothing to keep that stomach situated, like stable. So I've been really happy to see that. Even things like Squirrel's nut butter and various brands that, people are saying, okay, I'm going to think outside the box a little bit and start using some different products. And then certainly with
Hmm.
ultra running, people use real food. Aid stations are known notorious for quesadillas to corn dogs to gummy bears. And so that's a
Yeah.
very different individual conversation that I need to have with athletes about what are you able to tolerate. Um,
Yeah.
so
That's the adage that ultra marathons are just eating events with racing thrown in, or running mixed in. Um, Yeah, nothing like the 75-mile, pepperoni pizza at the aid station or whatever, which I have
Exactly.
certainly taken part in.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, it seems like we've come a long way too on the you mentioned Gatorade, which um, has always seemed weird to me. I'm like, this is just Kool-Aid, like, but whatever.
It is.
But it seems like we've come a long way on the hydration side of things too, with just like understanding actual electrolytes and like sweat rate and what that means for different athletes. And it's not just like dumping sugar in there. And, it feels like we're getting more nuanced in that space too, to actually support athletes, versus like a one size fits all. What are the, um, what's your, I guess, stance or advice on like the hydration side of things in terms of like electrolytes? And I know it's super individualized, but just as like a baseline, um, yeah, what should people be looking for? Because I think that's something we miss, and most people are chronically dehydrated anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, pushback if that's not been your experience or if I'm way off, but I feel like most people just don't hydrate during their lives, and then they go exercise, and then they try to like get it all in, and and it's just this kind of like spiral of
Mm-hmm.
always being behind.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, what's the hydration side of things look like from your perspective?
Oh, I could talk about hydration literally all day. I get so fired up talking about it because I've been doing the sweat testing, the precision hydration and sweat testing for so long. I have seen everything. And I would say, yeah, you're accurate in saying a lot of athletes are dehydrated chronically, and a lot of athletes are really under consuming sodium.
Mm,
You kind of you grow up hearing on media and going to the doctor and all these things like don't overconsume sodium. If you do, your blood pressure is going to skyrocket. And I always have to explain to an athlete when they come in, I'm like, you are not sitting on the couch eating Big Macs and boosting your sodium up through the roof. You are out there sweating. You're losing a ton of sweat. And in that sweat, 90% of the electrolyte that makes up sweat is sodium. So if you don't replace your sodium, your body is going to tell you quickly, in ways like muscle cramping, not recovering, extreme fatigue, GI issues, the list goes on and on. So, with the testing that I do, it's looking at sweat composition or how salty your sweat is or how unsalty your sweat is. And because there's such a huge range when it comes to person, anywhere from 200 milligrams of sodium lost to 2,000 milligrams of sodium lost per liter of sweat, you until you have a test and assess what's going on with you individually, it's very hard to know what you need in the way of electrolytes. And electrolytes is such a blanket term, People are like, what do I need? Do I need all of the electrolytes? Do I just need sodium? What type of product? There's a million products out there. And so that's something I've been so fortunate to do with people is really help them fine tune their hydration plan, which in turn elevates their performance to the highest level possible, assuming their fueling plan is on par with where it needs to be too. I think generally speaking, people come in and they're like, I'll use an example of this week. I had a client come in. He's taking in 1/7 of the amount of sodium that he needs per hour. So taking in about
oh,
140 milligrams of sodium needs 750 milligrams of sodium. And that's a
wow.
huge difference, or whatever the exact math was. It was way under what he needs to be taking in. And people are scared to overconsume. But after I explained to them that you actually need it, that your body will start shutting down if you don't have the correct amount of sodium going back in, that you really do need that. So, I'd say on average, athletes need anywhere from 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams per hour, but that is very heavily tied to the amount of fluid that you're taking in per hour. It's a ratio. So it's hard to just give that recommendation without knowing how much fluid they're taking in and what their losses are. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's been one of the great. We've to your point, we've applied some nuance to like the sodium conversation, right? We They used to just be this blanket. I remember even, when I was training really hard and racing a lot, it was like, yeah, they were like, oh, you can't take in too much sodium. And like, fast forward, um, I am a very salty sweater. Like I've worked like with you, like just like you, I've worked with Persistent Hydration for number of years. I've been a partner at TECs, like done the sweat tests, and I'm like, oh, no wonder, right? Like I'm like I use their like maximum
Yeah,
product, and then of course like, and then if it's hot or I'm on plate like that, just gets it's more and more. Um, so yeah, I think, and then even now, like we're seeing, it's becoming more common to do, to put a little bit of like we're talking about like the uptake of water, right?
mhm.
People are, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but we're understanding more that just like chugging 3 gallons of water, straight water a day, like might not be doing what we've the intended outcome, which is hydration, right? You actually need something for the body to like soak that up. And so you're seeing, adding a little bit of salt and adding like, squeeze a lemon or add, and just kind of daily hydration and how we're thinking about that. Um, what's your, what, yeah, how should people approach, again, knowing that it's really individualized, but what's your take on like, how to drink, how to hydrate like in our lives, and this, I feel like for a while we were just cramming water, right? Everybody was just peeing every like 10
Yeah,
minutes. And now I think we're trying to, there's a bit of nuance there where we're kind of backing off of some of that and,
yeah.
and understanding like how the body works. What's your thoughts there?
Well, and it is tricky with keeping sodium where it needs to be. It's kind of a narrow range that sodium is happiest at. And if you overconsume fluid, you can get into issues where you completely throw your sodium out of whack. And that happens with athletes who are under consuming sodium in race type scenarios, and they end up in the medical tent needing IVs because their cognitive function is totally dropped off. They don't know where they're at. Their GI system isn't working and that kind of thing. So hydrating it well is very important. You can overhydrate, and that's what leads into hyponatremia. As far as day-to-day hydration goes, I'm seeing a huge boost in people. Most people coming in to meet with me are using Element, or there's the other one that is sold at Costco. And it not only has a good amount of sodium, but it has like a lot of the B vitamins and other nutrients in it. I can't remember the name right now. It'll come to me. But Element's really, really popular right now. It's 1,000
Mhm.
milligrams of sodium, which that's a pretty good amount. So if you start getting people taking 4 or 5 of those packets a day, and they're not sweating out, their sweat losses aren't big. You could overconsume sodium with that type of thing. 1,000 milligrams is a hearty chunk of sodium. So that being said, I don't know that a full packet of that is necessary, to take with you on a walk or be walking around the office, because most people are consuming a decent amount of sodium just in their day to day life, just through food sources. Our food sources of sodium are sodium chloride, and most of the quality sports nutrition sources of sodium are sodium citrate. So there is a distinction there between the type of sodium that you need depending on what activity you're doing, or if you're just trying to generally remain hydrated. If you eat a decently moderate amount of sodium just in your day-to-day life, you're probably okay with just water. Now, that being
Mhm.
said, I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona right now, and wow, this place heats up, especially as you get towards summer. So I do have some people add in a supplement as they get into summer because you just sweat walking out to your car. So highly individual, depending on where you live, how much you're sweating, what your activity level is like, and what your dietary sodium is like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Again, I think that's where I see the biggest positive change just in this conversation around nutrition and fueling, and even just athletic, our athletic endeavors in general, is just the conversation is being open up to explore more nuance,
Mhm.
right? And I always say like that ends up being kind of the theme of this podcast. It's just like it's never just a straight answer, right? Like there, it's what type of sodium, what type of
Yeah.
fuel, what's your right. There's so many, and for so long in so many different genres, we have just given these very blanket
Hmm.
statements. And again, that's pervasive on social media, right? You have people that are like, "This is the
Oh,
gospel," right? This is, and you're like, "Well, I mean, to what end, right? To whom are you speaking?"
exactly.
Um, and maybe, but maybe not,
Mhm.
right? And so we take these things, and then we get so um, it's so easy to get kind of for that to become our hill that we die on,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's diet or hydration or particular products or particular supplements, and the list goes on. And so, yeah, I love your take that. Yeah, I mean, just it depends. Like there's a lot of opportunity to explore how to maximize your performance and how you feel and your potential, but it's all very individualized. So,
That's the one thing.
um,
That's the top thing I've learned in all these years in business is it has to be individual. If I come in with a client with a set idea of what should happen with them, you cannot do that because and that's what makes it interesting too. It'd be so boring if I implemented the same plan with everybody. And so it
right,
all the way down to products, hydration products, goos, chews, what type, real food, not real food. It's got to be individual. And I really get on social media when that blanket approach is put on everybody. I get very frustrated with that because that is not what is going to benefit everybody the most. It might benefit a small group of people, but not the individual. So yeah.
right. Yeah, same thing on the coaching front too. It depends.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, like as coaches working with athletes, like we have some constructs, we have some theories and some philosophies, physiologically that we know support an athlete's general kind of trajectory and well-being. But how we go about eliciting that and putting that into play in an individual's life that's balancing all these different pieces is wildly different, right? Two athletes going for the same race, that approach should look very different. Right now, you might be hitting similar benchmarks because there's things we're trying to, but how you get there, that path is totally individualized. So,
You're right.
um, well, that seems like a high point to end on, and something that I believe in is, yeah, it's you got to find what works for you. You got to find your own path to get there. So, yeah, thanks, Brooke. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.